This is part two of our ongoing discussion of religion and extremism. Last time we examined the loss of connectivity in our world and observed that the loss of connectivity seems to coincide with the loss of nationalism and religion, which we seem to be more getting away from in the contemporary world as the influence of religion and nationalism have seemed to wane in the recent years. There's been a rise in extremism and fundamentalism to take their place, which we'll explore today. As people have lost religion, it seems as though they have become more anxious and uncertain about the world and their place in it. And so, as we think about the loss of religion, I wanted to just cite a couple of studies that help to contextualize this. A 2007 and 2015 study from the Pew Research Center found that, quote, these changes, referring to the loss of religion, are taking place across the religious landscape, affecting all religions, or sorry, all regions of the country in many demographic groups. While the drop in Christian affiliation is particularly pronounced among young adults, it is occurring among Americans of all ages. The same trends are seen among whites, blacks, and Latinos, among both college graduates and adults with only a high school education, and among women as well as men, close quote. So these trends are interracial across academic and economic spectrums. It defies age and gender. It seems to be pervasive in all facets of the populace. It seems that doubts and uncertainties are becoming more and more problematic today, and people are turning elsewhere to find find certainty and truth within the world. Additionally, the research stated, quote, the percentage of adults 18 and older who describe themselves as Christians has dropped by nearly 8 points in just 7 years. Over the same period, the percentage of Americans who are religiously unaffiliated, describing themselves as atheist or agnostic or nothing in particular, has jumped more than 6 points. Religious groups across the spectrum are concerned about the lukewarm feelings people have towards religion. I had you watch a video that focused more on millennials and that demographic and how they're becoming less affiliated with religion. And we see this kind of a growing trend within the church as well, right? The church is not immune to these trends. While there still is growth in the church, it is slowed to 1.7% in 2015. And there's no published statistics about people who are leaving the church, either formally or informally. So it's hard to make any determination about that, but it does seem as though the loss of religion does seem to be a pervasive notion within our society. This has led to many finding other things to replace organized religion. People today seem to be looking for something to direct them in the place of God. So they turn to things like the internet or social media. Marie Kondo, for instance, and her tidying up was popular a year ago. People sought her advice and expertise in how to declutter. And while she was teaching them how to declutter their homes from unnecessary possessions, it almost seemed like people were also learning how to declutter their minds, their hearts, and their spirits as she worked with them. It was almost a healing of sorts and became a quasi religion. In fact, as I went to DI on several trips as we were decluttering our own home, kind of caught up in this movement, I noticed that there was now a large line to make these donations. So it seemed like it was the world, or at least our society, was caught up in this notion to declutter. Others today turn to more regimented diets like paleo or keto. Uh, Others have more turned to mindfulness or yoga. It seems like society is looking for its way. and has turned away from organized religion to find it. Fundamentalism is the strict adherence to basic principles of any subject or discipline. Fundamentalism suggests that our world today is somehow lost, and we need to return to some earlier essence of ourselves to find harmony and balance. This narrative ranges from anything from religion to social movements. In social movements, the focus is that society has become corrupt, and we need to return to some previous way of doing something. Environmentalism, for instance, is one of these fundamentalist movements and suggests that our modern way of doing agriculture is problematic, and our way of using energy is polluting the environment. They suggest that we need to use less chemicals, less carbon emissions, we need less pollution, and we need to turn to a more natural way because our pure essence in this modern world has become lost, and we need to return to the way humanity used to be. So their narrative is that we need to turn away from the corruptions of big agriculture or corporations or chemicals to return to a closer way that humanity used to live prior to the Industrial Revolution. So you have people turning to natural or holistic healing with herbs and vitamins and energy stones. You have people to turning silos into domiciles to live and only using wind and solar power. We saw this experiment with Colin Bevan in an earlier lecture where he tried to live for a year without a carbon footprint. We also see fundamentalism in conservative movements like the Tea Party, which argue that our way of government has become corrupt and we've strayed away from the Constitution and we need to return to the pure essence of what the Founding Fathers have envisioned, right? A common narrative that we are corrupt and we need to return to some earlier existence. Can become secular religions of themselves, promising some way of life or finding some type of meaning. This is one growing trend that we see today, the idea of going back to our roots to find our true selves. It seems like a comforting narrative in a world that feels lost and alienated and alone. In a world of confusion and uncertainty, it feels comforting to turn to things that promise understanding, enlightenment, or a way of life. So, as people turn away from religion, which used to do this for people, they now turn to social and political movements for this. So, I'd like you to pause the video for a moment and to think about other political and social movements that share a fundamentalist narrative. What social movements do you see today that use that fundamentalist story? There still are pockets of fundamentalist religions, but these seem to be waning. Westboro Baptist, for example, is one of them, and they go to places like abortion clinics or soldiers' funerals and they protest. And they're known for their hate speech. They hate soldiers, as we see here, this person carrying a sign, thank God for dead soldiers. They hate gays, they hate Jews. They pretty much hate anyone who is not them. And moreover, their narrative is that God hates who they hate. And so I think that's an interesting notion to think that God loves who they love and hate who they hate. Fundamentalists do seem to see the world in a dualistic way. You're either with them or you are their enemy. I want to take a look at, for a moment, the idea of extremism and how this fits into this fundamentalist narrative, but it's also quite different as well. Extremisms hold very extreme dogmatic views. Generally, extremist groups believe that other groups pose an existential threat. Thus, they frame conflict as an us versus them and hold their principles to be more important than evidence or facts. Where the West seems to be turning away from organized religions, other parts of the world, there seems to be a rise in religious extremism. We see this with jihadist movements associated with Islam. These groups see the West as an existential threat. They see in terms of this dualistic mindset. There is either them or there is us. They feel that their way is being threatened by the West, and the only way to preserve their tradition, their heritage, their religion, their way of life is to destroy the other. That's extremism. There is no collaboration, there is no cooperation, there is no compromise. There is only me or you. The real problem that we face today is going to be with fundamental extremists. These movements similarly have a dualistic mindset that oversimplify the world and create an either or perspective. You are either with them or you are their enemy. They see things as a constant threat to their way of life and their values, their belief systems. Other ideas threaten their own. So jihadist groups see Christians and Jews as a threat to their sovereignty. This cartoon captures an essence of fundamentalism and extremism, where you have George Bush on the left and Osama bin Laden on the right. And both of them have the same narrative, just doing the work of the Almighty. And so the irony that we see here is both of them believe that they're doing the work of God, but in the background, both of them are bringing death and destruction. And so the problems that we're going to face today is going to be dogmatism. It's going to be seeing the world in a dualistic mindset. It's going to be extremism. The narrative that we see today is the return to roots, right? Extremism borrows that fundamentalist idea that there will be a constant threat against the modern world and this return to the origins. And so this is the major conflict that we're going to see for the next several decades, that we cannot sustain our current way of life, and we need radical change to return to the pure essence. So we see this with jihadists, and we see this kind of dualistic mindset to oversimplify very complex social issues and promote a very simplified solution. And so, what we need to do is we need to caution our political discourse and guard against this dualistic mindset that often spills over into politics, where Democrats see Republicans as the enemy and Republicans see Democrats as evil. The truth is that they're both right and they are both wrong about most things. And both are framing the discourse as an either or scenario with the added pressure that one way will lead to salvation and the other way will lead to destruction. And that's problematic. We should avoid seeing the other side as an existential threat. As I've watched the news over the last couple of days regarding COVID-19, I've observed a divided narrative. I follow news in England and in France. I read the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, CNN, MSNBC, Fox News. And it's interesting to see the way that outlets shape what's happening. You have the same event being reported, but a very different interpretation of that event. One news outlet, for instance, focuses on growing concern of the virus and how it's going to overrun healthcare facilities. Other news outlets report the same pandemic, but focus on how the virus is affecting the economy. The same event, but different stories. So the real war that we're going to see will be the war on information, and more importantly, with the interpretation of that information. To combat this dualist mindset, we need to focus on nuanced debates and not seeing others as enemies or threats. We need to reach a more mutual understanding and respect. So, the real battle that we're going to face for the foreseeable future will not be on the battlefields as they used to be. Although I could be wrong, it seems that our future wars will be wars of ideas, it will be ideology. For now, it seems that the idea of one nation facing another nation and battling for supremacy is all but gone. Sure, there may be a few skirmishes here and there, but the idea of one country's army, navy, and air force fighting against another's army, navy, and air force seems to be something that's hopefully in the past. Again, near future developments, of course, could change this. However, the current trend suggests that the idea of something like World War I or World War II happening again is unlikely. Those of you that take political science courses may be familiar with a study that states that never have two democracies fought each other in war. There have been wars where democracies have fought against dictatorships, but no two democracies have ever went to war. And the current trend in the world is that nations are turning more and more towards democracies. Thus, other major conflicts between nations seem less and less likely. The probability will be that wars, uh, as there will be wars, as it's the human tendency, but these wars will be different from the past. In fact, the war on terror exposed the U.S.'s old mindset of regarding wars was outdated. After September 11th, the U.S. wanted to fight the old type of war, finding a nation to fight against. So we waged a war against Iraq and then later with Afghanistan. However, we soon learned that our battleships and airplanes were less effective in this type of war. We learned that this is much more of a person-to-person war. The enemy does not wear a single uniform like they used to. They're not easily to identify. The enemy looks identical to our allies. They wear the same clothes and live in the same places, which makes it feel like we're fighting shadows or ghosts. We're fighting people who are friends one day and are enemies the next. It's a different type of war. It reminds me of the Book of Mormon, where there used to be a lot of wars, or there once was a time where there was a large-scale wars between the Nephites and the Lamanites, but then that seemed to change. It seemed to evolve, where the true enemy then became the Gadianton robbers. These were extremist groups who hid among the people to undermine the way of life. In many ways, this is the war on terror. While there may be national wars at some point in the future, because who knows how society will change, it seems like for the foreseeable future, we'll be fighting smaller scale conflicts against pockets of extremists. We'll be fighting against ideology. We'll be combating extremism. So this is where I wanted to turn my attention, right? Our last lecture discussed the differences between religions and cults. Of the several differences that we discussed, one important demarcation was that of degree. Cults are much more extreme. To the same extent, we can say that the similar difference exists between fundamentalism and extremism. Fundamentalism sees the world as lost and corrupt, which is appealing to some and tries to go back to an earlier notion of purity. Extremism shares the same narrative, but sees things in terms of an existential threat, where for one to exist, the other must be diminished. Next time, what we're going to do is we're going to explore Benjamin Barber's World versus Jihad, where he takes a look at the prevailing conflict that we'll face in the future, which will be the tension between globalization and tribalism, where we will see forces that will try to unite us versus forces that will try to keep us in smaller communities. And so, what we'll take a look at next time is, are we moving more towards a unified world of globalization, or do you think that we're going to return to more of a previous notion of tribalism, smaller pockets of groups that live independent from each other? And so we're going to take a look at this article, World versus Jihad.